In this video, we're going to talk about the 3 things you do not need in order to launch and start growing your app and business. Now, make sure you stick around until the end because we're first going to talk about what you do need, and then we're going to go into what you do not need. Now, some of this might go against what you are currently planning for your app's development, launch, and growth. So make sure you stick around until the end because I want you to be able to take these frameworks and strategies and implement them into your own plan so you can successfully launch and scale early and quickly. Now, first, if you're new around here, my name is Kristen, and I'm the co-founder of Coaching No Code Apps, where we help business owners and industry experts build custom apps to either start their app-based business or grow their existing business, all without coding and with no technical background required. So we're going to jump right into this. First, the things you do need in order to build and launch your app early and start growing quickly. Then we're going to go into the things that you really just don't need. So what I'm going to do is share my screen, and we're going to jump over to the whiteboard here. Let me go full screen so you can see this. Okay, so the things you do need in order to launch your app and really start building some early traction. We're going to look at this as if we are ascending a staircase. All right, so down here, we have our version 1 app, and up here, we have, we'll say our version 1.5. And then we have our version 2, and then we continue upward from there. So what we're looking at here is really the first few stages that your app and your business will go through before you really start scaling up and expanding onward. So when we look at your version 1 down at the bottom here, what we're looking at is really like your MVP. Now, I use the term MVP less and less because I see it misconstrued a lot. But what we're really looking at the very bottom is just a core functional app that you can start testing, something that you can bring alpha testers onto. They can see, or they can help you see whether your app is functioning to serve that core purpose that it has been designed to serve. Now, these might not be your ongoing users, right? These very first test users. We're really just looking for core functionality here. And then when we get up to our version 1.5, this is when we start doing some beta testing, okay? Beta testing meaning we're bringing users on and we're testing for adoption. So people are starting to implement the app into their daily processes, whether that's in their personal lives or in their businesses, but we're still doing a lot of testing here. And then when we come up to the version 2, this is kind of what most people think of as a bigger, more wide-scale launch. And we're going to call it your rollout, because this is when you start to move beyond the beta testing and you really start going into your really just rolling out your app, as I have here. Okay, so there are certain things that you need to do during these steps in order to reach this rollout stage and beyond. And there are certain things you don't need in order to get all the way up here and keep growing from there. So we're going to look at each step here, and we're going to talk about what you do need. Now, let me zoom in here. When we look at this version 1 step down here at the bottom, right? When we're looking at that MVP, we're looking for the very initial core functionality. There are 3 things that you really need to be focusing on. Number 1, you need to be focusing on the problem that your app is solving. The number 1 problem, okay? The one thing that first and foremost you absolutely have to solve for your users in order for anything else beyond that to be relevant. Okay, so we're looking at the very core problem. We're looking at the person, and this is the very core primary user who you must solve that problem for in order for any of the rest of the features or the app or the people, the user types, to be relevant. Okay, so if your app is going to have multiple user types, then we're looking at the primary user type, the one you have to solve that core problem for. And we're looking at the outcome. Okay, the outcome meaning when you're solving this problem for this person, what are they trying to achieve? So if they need to achieve a certain thing in order to want to keep using the app, for the app to be useful for them, what is that outcome that they need? So really what you're doing is you are taking a user from here and you're really just bringing them right over here. Okay, so in your first version app, you need these three things in order to really start testing. It's pretty basic. It's easy to add a lot of complexity to this, but if you keep it pretty simple, you can launch really early and really quickly and start getting the feedback you need in order to then climb up to the next step, right? So this is where we get to our version 1.5, which is our beta testing. Okay, so when we're doing beta testing, we're really looking for adoption of the app. So we've solved the problem for the person and achieved the outcome. Now we need to be able to do it consistently so that they can use it on an ongoing basis. So this is pretty simple, but what we're looking for here is ultimately just adoption. So like I said, we take what we've created in that first version, and now we just go kind of into this cycle of saying, okay, you're using the app. Now, how can it be more effective? Okay, you're achieving the outcome. Now, how can you achieve that better or more conveniently or more quickly, right? So we're taking, again, that initial core product and we're just making it easier to adopt, all right? Very simple adoption, okay? So to be clear, we're not looking at expanding the app drastically here. We're just looking at streamlining the existing core functionality and just making it better, all right? Now, once we do that, then we can move up to that next step of really just rolling out the app, right? So rolling out the app, meaning we're out of testing, right? And we are now expanding our user base, all right? So the steps thus far have been pretty simple and pretty straightforward, and we're already up to this top step. So now we have to look at what we need here, right? What do we need in order to keep sending ourselves and our app up this staircase? So with this, we're going to look at three things. Let me see if we can get some room here. All right. Three different things when we're at this step where we are prepared now to start rolling out the app. All right. So at this point, we have that core product, right, that we've tested for the functionality. We have the core product that has now been streamlined and has been made to be more usable and adoptable, okay? And now we're just looking at now making all of that better, okay? So on that second step where we have that V1.5, we're doing the alpha testing, we're looking at making the very core functionality better. Now, when we get to this V2 step, we're looking at making the overall app better. So this is where we can start looking at adding on more functionality, more features, really expanding the app. Okay, so in order to do this, you need to look at three things. You need to look at measuring, okay? And if you are a fan of the lean startup method, then this will resonate with you. This will be familiar. We want to look at measuring the feedback the data you are getting from your users, okay? So that means bringing it in, number one, that's measuring, bringing it in, having a way of intaking the data. We want to look at learning from that data. Learning meaning finding trends. What's working, what's not working, and how are we identifying trends in each of those areas, the things that are working and the things that aren't working. And then we need to look at building, right? So take that data, take those trends that you found, and now implement them back into the app. So you can start iterating. And you can do this in 3 ways. You can change these existing features, you can add on new features, or you can remove features, okay? But in order to really roll out the app, these are the things you have to do. So we're going to zoom back out here so we can see our full picture now. And like I said, it's pretty simple in terms of what you do need. So let me move this over, give ourselves some room. So the things that you do need are up here, right? Now we're going to look at, down here, the things you don't need. And there are 3 things that I want to make sure it's clear that don't need to go into these first 3 steps. Okay, so what we're looking at now is really what goes up here. Okay, but I see way too many people adding these things into those first 3 steps. But these are the things that don't come until later, or that don't need to come until later. Okay, so number 1, first and foremost, things like SEO, design. I'm going to go more in depth into that. But when you are looking at the base of your app, the thing that you are learning from and iterating and bringing initial users onto, you don't need to be looking at really long-term things like SEO or really in-depth aesthetic design, okay? This trips up a lot of entrepreneurs because these are tactical things that you read a lot about, you hear a lot about, that a lot of people tell you you have to have in order to have a successful app or business. And so this might really contradict that. But the reality is things like SEO or really intensive design, aesthetic design, those just don't really have an impactful effect on your app until later. Number 1, SEO is a long game. When you implement SEO tactics, you don't see the results from those until much later down the road. And so when you are focusing on launching your app early so you can start growing quickly, SEO is one of the last things that you need to be pouring all your time and effort into. Yeah, you can be laying the foundational pieces, but I guarantee you there are far more lower hanging fruit opportunities available for you to go through these 3 stages than focusing on things like SEO, tactical things like SEO, or tactical things like really intensive user-facing design. Yes, it's, we don't have to launch an app that looks terrible. That's not what we're going to tell you to do. But you don't need to launch an app, and you shouldn't launch an app that looks like an app that has already been out there for 5 or 10 years, that has had time to go through tons and tons of feedback, to go through all of this, right? Measuring, learning, and building again and again and again and again, right? Design should be based on the feedback you get from users. And so if you take a deep dive into design during these first 3 steps, then you're going to be making a ton of guesses and doing a ton of backtracking because of it. So hold off on the guessing and just do what you need to do to climb these first 3 steps. Then you can have the feedback you need in order to actually implement a more long-term tactic. Okay, so you don't need these things, right? Number 2, you don't need to worry about long-term scalability. Now, whoa, you might be thinking, what in the world are you talking about? Why would I not think about that? But I want to challenge you here and remind you that we're looking at how to launch your app and your business quickly. So how can you launch it soon? And how can you grow it fast, right? Launch early, launch quickly, grow fast. What do you not need in order to do those things? You don't need to be looking at 5 years down the road, wondering, is my app going to be scalable? And I'm talking about scalability in 2 ways. One, technically, okay? A lot of people worry about whether or not their app is going to technically be scalable. So the foundation of their app, when they have a heavier load on their app, is it going to scale with that load? Now, yes, you want to create an app that is scalable, right? You want to create an app that is scalable so that you can climb these steps and ultimately reach this point here where you are expanding the app. Okay, that's an important thing. But what's not important right now is thinking to yourself, okay, 5 years down the road, I want my app to have 1 million users. And right now, I'm worried that it's not going to be scalable. Because when you think things like that, you are not going to be able to move forward and ever climb these steps in the first place. Okay, you actually have to get to step number 4 up here for this to matter, for the scalability to matter. If you never get there, it's irrelevant, okay? Now, we also look at this from a business standpoint, okay? I hear entrepreneurs sometimes holding themselves back from starting to build their apps or ever launching their apps because they are worried about the long-term scalability of their business model. Now, again, you might be thinking, what in the world are you talking about? These are important things. And yes, they're important, but even the most important things at the wrong time are not going to help you move forward. Okay, so yes, you want to make sure that you have validation for the thing you are building. But when we look at business scalability, I hear entrepreneurs saying things like, once I get to X monthly recurring revenue, or once I get to X load on the app, I'm worried that my business model is going to hit a ceiling and I won't be able to move higher from there. And so their thought process is, well, maybe I should pursue a different business model. Again, I have to challenge you here if this is something that you have thought about too. Yes, validate the need for your app. Of course, you want to make sure that people need your app. Generally, that's not as much of an issue because, at least for the entrepreneurs who we work with, they have a tie to the industry for which they're building the app, whether that's a business tie or a personal tie as a consumer. So they have ways to validate the app and they know there is a need. So yes, you want to make sure there's a need. But do you need to make sure that your app is going to scale to $50,000 monthly recurring revenue, $100,000 monthly recurring revenue when you're just climbing these initial 3 steps? No, because you will not be able to figure that out until you get to step number 4. But if you never get to step number 4, it doesn't really matter, right? It's irrelevant. But you can't guess on that. Yes, you can do a ton of research And you can hypothesize endlessly. You can, but you're never going to get your answer until you get to step number 4. And if you get to step number 4 and you realize that for some reason your app hits a ceiling in terms of scalability from a business model standpoint, well, congratulations. You're now growing a business, and now you need to adjust, pivot, align, whatever you need to do to continue growing. That's the way business works, right? Not something that you need to figure out before you even get to V1 down here, okay? Now, the third thing you don't need in order to climb these first 3 steps are your assumptions, okay? Now, here's what I mean by assumptions. Everything you're building ultimately is an assumption to some extent. No matter how much validation you have for your app or how much of a need you have for it, every single thing you're building is still an assumption. Even when you're building an app for your own business, right? It's still an assumption. And I speak to that from personal experience. We build our own apps to handle our own business's internal operations. And even those are assumptions because we build the app in a way that we think we need it. But once you actually start using it in your day-to-day processes, that tells you what needs to be changed, what needs to be added, or what can be removed. Okay, so it's all an assumption. But in order to validate your assumptions, you have to climb up these steps. If you don't, you will never have the assumption validation. And so what I see people doing in these, again, these first 3 steps, I see them making assumptions on not necessarily what the features are that need to be in their core app, but how complex and customized those features need to be, okay? So let's say, going back to this core version 1 app here, you have your problem, you have your person, and you have your outcome. Well, any layer of complexity that you're adding on top of that is an added assumption, right? It's just putting another layer, another layer, another layer on top of the assumptions that you're already making, right? So when you do that, what ultimately happens is you get to step number 4 and you realize that you did a lot of work probably for nothing, okay? Now, again, you have to make some assumptions, and that's not a bad thing. But I'm talking about when you have what's needed for these initial 3 steps, but before you even start climbing up them, you're adding on top of that, okay? That's taking those assumptions way too far. You don't need to do that in order to get to step number 4. You just don't, right? You don't need to do that to get beyond that either, because at that point, you're having your users tell you what they need and show you what they need. Okay, so really you're getting direct validation there, which helps a ton, right? But again, you have to get to that step. You have to get to the step of having users to be able to take advantage of that opportunity and leverage it, okay? So assumptions, we've talked about how they can apply to features and functionality. They can also apply to things like logos, right? Branding, that kind of stuff. Honestly, if you launch your app in your business, you can get to step 4 without any of it. I'm not saying you have to do that or you have to hold off from them, but I do see way too many entrepreneurs spending weeks, months of their time figuring out their logo, figuring out their branding before they've ever brought a single beta user on board. And you don't need that, right? That's another type of an assumption. Yes, those things become important, but again, even the most important things at the wrong time they're not the most important things, right? So you don't need these longer term tactics like your SEO, right? And your design and things like that. You don't need those longer term tactics. Yes, you can lay the foundational pieces for them, just so that the foundation is there. You don't need to deep dive because those are longer term tactics, and they're not necessary in order to climb the first 3 steps. Figuring out the scalability, the long-term scalability, both from a technical and a business standpoint, you can't do that. You can't figure that out until you actually get up to step number 4. Again, yes, put the pieces in place when you're starting so that you're laying the foundation for it. But don't let that hold you back, because you don't need those hard answers in order to get to step 4, and you cannot get them until you get to step number 4. Okay, and the same is true with assumptions. You don't need to be making these long-term assumptions for your app in order to get to step number 4. Yes, you have to make some assumptions to lay the foundation. Everything is an assumption until you test it, right? But you don't need to add layers and layers and layers of assumptions onto your app and onto your business, because once you get to step number 4, you're likely going to find that many of them were wrong, okay? So hold off on them until you actually get there, so you can validate everything and move forward more quickly, right? So again, the things you do need are these foundational pieces. Solve the problem for the person to get the outcome. Then solve it in a way that makes it easier to adopt into day-to-day processes, right? And then measure the feedback, learn from it, find the trends, and build onto your app to make the overall app better, right? Then you can start growing and scaling really quickly from there, okay? You can move from step 1 to 2 to 3 really quickly in a really short amount of time if you keep these fundamentals in mind. But if you find yourself slipping into these 3 areas, it's going to slow you down, okay? And when I see people falling into these 3 areas, these initial steps take a year, 2 years to go through. That should be brought down to months, okay? It should be a lot faster than that. It can be a lot faster than that. So I hope this helps you. I hope it helps you identify what you do need to move quickly, to launch early, and to grow quickly, and what you don't need, what you can hold off on until later. Take this framework, take these fundamentals, implement them into your own app, into your own development plan, into your own launch and growth plan, and they will help you move all the more quickly because of it. All right, I hope that was helpful for you. Thanks so much for watching. And if you are just starting out with your app, or if you haven't started yet, but you want to make sure you are able to move forward quickly, strategically, in the right direction, then head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. We have a free 75-minute workshop that takes you through a ton of step-by-step strategy, talks about some no-code tools and how you can leverage those, and ultimately how you can move forward correctly and quickly with your app and your app-based business. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop for that, and we'll see you there. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.